The Gap and the Gain by The Gap and the Gain, written by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy, is a book about how we measure our progress in life and how that measurement determines whether we feel successful or constantly behind. The core idea is simple but powerful. There are two ways to measure your life. One way leads to frustration and anxiety. The other leads to confidence and motivation. The difference between these two ways of thinking can change how you experience your work, your goals, and your happiness. The book begins with a problem many high achievers face. They set big goals, they work hard, they accomplish things that most people would admire. Yet instead of feeling satisfied, they often feel like they are not doing enough. They look at where they want to be and compare their current position to that ideal. Because the ideal is always far away, they feel like they are losing. They feel behind. The authors call this way of thinking the gap. The gap is when you measure yourself against an ideal that keeps moving further away as you grow. In contrast, the gain is when you measure yourself against where you used to be. Instead of asking, how far am I from my ideal, you ask, how far have I come from where I started? This shift changes everything. When you look backward at your progress, you see growth, you see effort, you see wins. You feel encouraged rather than discouraged. The authors explain that most ambitious people naturally live in the gap. Society teaches us to focus on what we do not have. We are encouraged to set bigger goals, raise our standards, and constantly improve. While growth is important, the problem arises when improvement becomes the only measure of worth. If you are always focused on what is missing, you will never feel complete. Even after reaching a goal, your mind quickly replaces it with a bigger one. The satisfaction lasts only a moment before disappearing. This pattern creates a cycle. You achieve something, you feel good briefly. Then you compare yourself to a higher standard or to someone who is further ahead. The result is a constant sense of falling short. Over time, this leads to stress, burnout, and even depression. The authors argue that many successful people are unhappy not because they are failing, but because they are measuring themselves incorrectly. The gap is not about having goals. The authors do not suggest lowering standards or giving up ambition. Instead, they explain that goals should guide you forward, but your sense of worth and satisfaction should come from recognizing progress. Goals are direction. They are not the measure of your value. When goals become the measure, you lose. The gain is a different mental framework. It does not ignore the future, but it places the present and the past in a healthier relationship. In the gain, you regularly look back and acknowledge what you have achieved. You compare yourself to your former self. You ask how much you have learned, how much you have grown, and what obstacles you have overcome. This practice builds confidence because it proves that you can improve. It also creates gratitude because you see that your current position was once something you wanted. A key point in the book is that confidence does not come from reaching an ideal. It comes from recognizing progress. When you look at your past and see growth, you trust yourself more. You know you can handle challenges because you have handled them before. This trust reduces anxiety about the future. Instead of fearing that you are not enough, you understand that you are improving. The authors explain that the gap is based on comparison to something external or imaginary. It may be an ideal version of yourself, another person's success, or a perfect outcome. Because these standards are often unrealistic or constantly changing, they are impossible to fully reach. The gain, however, is based on facts. Your progress is real, your past effort is real, your improvement is measurable. One important theme in the book is the relationship between measurement and identity. How you measure your life shapes how you see yourself. If you constantly measure against ideals, you may see yourself as lacking. If you measure against your past progress, you see yourself as capable and growing. This difference affects your decisions, your relationships, and your emotional state. The book also discusses how the gap affects relationships. When people live in the gap, they often judge others the same way they judge themselves. They focus on what others are not doing instead of appreciating what they are doing. This creates tension and dissatisfaction. In contrast, living in the gain encourages appreciation. When you look at how far someone has come instead of how far they are from perfection, you become more supportive and patient. Another major idea is that living in the gain increases motivation. At first, this may seem surprising. Many people believe that being dissatisfied drives success. They think that pressure and self-criticism push them forward. The authors argue the opposite. They suggest that confidence and positive reinforcement create sustainable motivation. When you see progress, you feel capable. When you feel capable, you take more action. When you take more action, you make more progress. This creates a healthy cycle. The gap creates a negative cycle. You focus on what is missing. You feel discouraged. You doubt yourself. Because of doubt, you hesitate or overwork in unhealthy ways. This can reduce performance and increase stress. Even if you succeed, the satisfaction is short-lived because your mind shifts to the next gap. The book also explores the idea of the ideal. Ideals are useful as direction, but they become harmful when treated as the standard for happiness.
Ideals are often shaped by culture, social media, or comparison. They are rarely fully defined or stable. When you reach one ideal, you quickly create another. The ideal always moves. This means the gap never closes. In contrast, the gain is stable because the past does not change. If you lost weight, built a business, improved a skill, or strengthened a relationship, that progress remains part of your story. By focusing on this growth, you create a solid foundation of achievement. The authors encourage a daily practice of measuring in the gain. This might include writing down wins from the day, reflecting on progress over months or years, or simply asking yourself how today is better than a previous time. This habit trains your mind to look for growth instead of deficiency. They also explain that many people confuse growth with never being satisfied. Growth does not require self-criticism. You can appreciate where you are and still want more. These two ideas are not opposites. In fact, appreciation strengthens growth because it builds energy and resilience. The book provides examples of entrepreneurs who built successful companies, yet felt miserable because they always compared themselves to larger competitors or bigger visions. Once they shifted to the gain and recognized their own development, their emotional experience changed even though their external circumstances did not. The business was the same, the revenue was the same, the difference was the measurement. The authors also connect the gap to perfectionism. Perfectionism is often praised as a sign of high standards. However, perfectionism usually means focusing on what is wrong. It means measuring against a flawless ideal. Because perfection is impossible, perfectionists often feel disappointed. The gain approach softens perfectionism by acknowledging improvement instead of demanding flawlessness. Another powerful idea in the book is that your brain naturally looks for problems. This helped humans survive in dangerous environments. However, in modern life, this tendency can make you focus on what is missing rather than what is working. Living in the gain is a conscious choice to redirect attention toward progress and achievement. The authors also discuss time perspective. The gap pulls you into an imagined future where you are not yet enough. The gain brings you back to the present and the past where you can see evidence of growth. This shift reduces anxiety because anxiety often comes from worrying about a future standard you haven't reached. They emphasize that the gain is not denial. It does not mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is perfect. It means acknowledging reality in a balanced way. You can recognize areas for improvement while also recognizing how far you have come. Gratitude plays an important role in the gain. When you look at your past and see progress, you naturally feel thankful. Gratitude increases well-being and strengthens relationships. It also reduces envy and comparison, which are common features of the gap mindset. The book explains that when you define success only as reaching a future ideal, you postpone happiness. You tell yourself that you will feel good once you reach a certain income, status, or achievement. But when you arrive, the feeling fades because the goal moves. The gain allows you to experience success now by recognizing ongoing growth. The authors encourage readers to redefine success as progress, not perfection. Success becomes a continuous experience rather than a distant destination. This redefinition changes how you experience each day. Instead of chasing a finish line that keeps moving, you celebrate the journey. They also point out that living in the gain strengthens resilience. When setbacks happen, you can look at your past and remember other challenges you have overcome. This perspective gives you confidence that current problems are temporary. In the gap, setbacks feel like proof that you are not enough. In the gain, setbacks are part of a larger story of growth. The book highlights the importance of tracking progress. Many people do not realize how far they have come because they do not record it. By keeping track of wins, lessons, and improvements, you create visible evidence of growth. This evidence supports the gain mindset. The authors also discuss how the gap can damage self-esteem. When your identity depends on reaching an ideal, your sense of worth becomes fragile. Any mistake or delay feels like failure. In the gain, your identity is based on growth. Mistakes become part of learning rather than proof of inadequacy. They describe how entrepreneurs often experience success depression. After achieving a major goal, they feel empty instead of fulfilled. This happens because they were living in the gap. The goal was supposed to close the distance to the ideal, but once achieved, the ideal expands. Without shifting to the gain, satisfaction remains out of reach. The book encourages leaders to help their teams operate in the gain. Recognizing employee progress, celebrating milestones, and reflecting on growth create a positive culture. When teams focus only on targets they haven't reached, morale suffers. When they also acknowledge how far they have come, motivation increases. Another theme is personal agency. The gain strengthens your sense of control because it highlights actions you have taken and improvements you have made. The gap weakens agency because it emphasizes what you lack compared to an external standard. They also explain that living in the gain enhances creativity. When you feel safe and confident, your mind is more open to new ideas. When you feel pressured and inadequate, your mind narrows. The gain creates psychological safety that supports innovation. They address the idea that dissatisfaction is necessary for growth. While a desire for improvement is natural, chronic dissatisfaction is harmful. Sustainable growth comes from a positive emotional state. The gain provides that state by reinforcing capability and progress. The book concludes by reinforcing that the difference between a joyful life and a stressful one is often not circumstances but measurement. Two people with similar achievements can feel very different depending on whether they live in the gap or the gain. The shift is internal and available at any moment. In closing, the gap and the gain teaches that ambition does not have to cost happiness. You can pursue big goals while appreciating your progress. By measuring backward instead of only forward, you build confidence, gratitude, and resilience. The future can remain exciting and full of possibility, but your sense of success comes from recognizing how far you have already traveled. When you choose the gain, you turn progress into satisfaction and growth into a source of joy rather than pressure.